auteur theory, some of a specific creative vision, is the difference between Ghibli and Disney. Disney's animators are cogs in the machine. It's harder at Disney to get a feel for the impact of one animator or visionary, as of its collective nature. Sure, there are periods of Disney that have their own feeling, but that has more to do with the sign of the times. Many may see the Disney method as the best parts of creativity formed into a team, although it only works if your team is in sync, and if you've ever worked in a team, you know how hard that is, and how easy it is for it to fall apart. So I see why film students, especially the snobbier ones, prefer the one-man, one-vision approach of a Ghibli. Disney started with a similar kind of philosophy, doing bold things to change the game, but the way to that path involved stripping more and more of life and edge from the stories they were adapting. It's not like these original fairy tales were unpalatable, as the Soviet animation equivalent did a good job preserving the quality while keeping the core of the narrative intact, and the children loved it. In the end, it's apples and oranges. Both companies are trying to do very different things. The benefit of Disney is that they cover so many topics and flavors of that narrative. One of them is bound to relate to your tastes. So if Disney isn't auteur, what is? Hayao Miyazaki, the heart of Ghibli. His career captures an impressive vision of the evolving artist and the issues that may come with that. He's directed, written, and storyboarded 11 feature films, among a myriad of other projects in his career. Starting out at Toei when they were trying their Disney of the East period, he rose through the ranks until he was a key player in '68. He and Takahata created Horus, Prince of the Sun. While Takahata directed it, you can see the ideas presented left a huge impact on Miyazaki as an animator and a person. Puss in Boots showed his energetic, swashbuckling admiration for adventure serials, not to mention his love for the chase scene. This continued onto Animal Treasure Island, where Miyazaki's key animation brought a lot of personality to the leaping cannonballs and swordplay. In the third act, there's a giant chase scene that encompasses the finale. In the same year, his work in Alibaba takes the chase scene to new levels of absolute absurdity. It's just the breaking point for that idea, while Lupin III brings all his boisterous quirks into one show. Throughout the decade, Miyazaki continued to work with Takahata, as Takahata's own direction moved towards the everyday mundane, a slice of life style. By '78, both of them had solidified their muses. Takahata was tackling subtlety in Anne of Green Gables, where Miyazaki starts work on Future Boy Conan, a landmark show where he pulls from those 11-year-old ideas, now working them into a TV anime production. It was tough, especially for Miyazaki. He was dissatisfied working with someone else's strict source material within the confines of TV anime. Later, he'd play faster and looser with all adaptations, like in 1979 with Castle of Cagliostro, Miyazaki's first theatrical film, where you can feel the echoes of his 70s quirks throughout, and a new narrative template. Problems do seep in with the amount of plot strands. There's so many, in fact, they had to cut some because of time constraints, and the plot does get in the way of the fun. All the revelations are spat out beforehand, while not being that shocking to begin with. It feels like the film has two minds. But when it's fun, it is a ton of fun, with some outrageous set pieces, even if purists may not like the changes to the source material and how all the new characters are as bland as wallpaper paste. Moving away from films for a moment, in 1981 Hayao begins to write Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. This massive series tries to expand on his muses as wide as possible. There's flying machines, adventure, Miyazaki girls, wild creature designs, lore, maps, hell, even the creator of Final Fantasy put it down as one of his major influences. Or should I say, the film adaptation. TV anime was not working for Miyazaki or Takahata. With a quick turnover and limited animation, Miyazaki wanted to do things the old way, an idea of a company that made big animated films, high risk but high reward. Hayao would direct his last TV episode in '83 to bet his career at the movies. Lucky for him, Nausicaa was a success, the biggest independent film of the time. A year later, Ghibli was born. With their first feature, Castle in the Sky, we see a mix of Miyazaki's wheelhouse. Among his more light-hearted, adventurous tone. In his proposal, he targeted a younger audience to be fun and thrilling in a classical way, with themes of emotional bonding. Castle is an experience that has much better pacing and control than his prior films, effortlessly moving between plot as it builds into this unique world full of wonder and childlike glee. Laputa is exciting, funny, cute, sweet, and all manner of other things that will win you over, even if it's a bit on the long side for a Ghibli affair. Although the characters get to grow and bond in a way that makes it worth it in the end. Takahata called it his favourite Miyazaki film, and there's a reason for that. But what redefined Ghibli as a brand was the 1988 movie My Neighbor Totoro, a Takahata-style story through the lens of Miyazaki's direction, harking back to Heidi and their panda shorts. Miyazaki's proposal stated it as a film which Japan could proudly show the world away from its darker and more mature animation that seemed to be rising in this period. It's a charming story of a family which has no broader narrative outside its characters' personal lives, while keeping a playful demeanour. It was shown as a double bill, making it the lighter of two halves against Grave of the Fireflies, and that's quite the double, I'll say that much. While not a success at launch, it later became the face of the company through the home market. In the 90s, Miyazaki feared stagnation in the company, so his next projects are a left turn. Kiki's Delivery Service was to be directed by Suino Katabuchi, but as Miyazaki's involvement deepened, he decided to steer the helm of the film's vision. It was based on the novel of the same name, although the animation moved the story in a different direction, towards conflict, a story of growing up, going to the city, and the struggles of employment, trying to find happiness while dealing with loneliness. Like a follow-up to the slice of life in Totoro, if the girls were a bit older. There's this melancholy throughout that grows, which in the finale it kind of betrays, so they can have that climactic Miyazaki set piece. Kiki gains this status as town hero, her problems melt away, which isn't emotionally realistic for the audience. Although this definitely could be more of an issue with the format. You're taking a series of books and converting them into a broad movie. Miyazaki always prefers to have warm endings, so this could be seen as a moment where Miyazaki's adventurous attitude might hinder the source material's overall direction, which we may see again later. Kiki was the first Ghibli movie to hit the black, making Porco Rosso's departure all the more bold. Its down-tempo tone, slow burn, that's my tempo. Porco Rosso is my favourite Miyazaki film. You could say every Miyazaki film is full of charm, but this one hits me the hardest. The subtlety of its characters' past, given the impression we're only seeing the tip of their iceberg. So full of personality that juxtapose, they throw the sharpest dialogue at each other. It even had this great English cast with Michael Keaton and a variety of veteran voice actors, who all give compelling performances to bring those characters to life. It started its life out as a short for an airline based on a 15-page comedy manga written by Miyazaki himself, which somehow evolved into this 90-minute behemoth, focusing on the hardships that come from working with passion, aiming towards that middle-aged businessman who, to quote Miyazaki, brain has been turned to tofu. Maybe Miyazaki related to that sentiment, but these were the types of people who'd be flying. Within that adult audience, it became one of his darker stories. Yet, still balancing that tone, the war in former Yugoslavia led to a change in pace from the manga, into something rebelling against fascism. There's a Casablanca quality to it, an old-school flair with high bravado. It's fun even when it's grim, saying no matter how bad it gets, you gotta keep living with courage. It's enough to make you fall in love, so it can break your heart in the end. Despite its idiosyncratic take on the formula, Porco became Ghibli's best-selling film yet, something that took Miyazaki by surprise. He never expected these films to leave outside of Japan, and oh boy did they leave Japan. During the 7-year gap between films, Miyazaki was making music videos, writing screenplays, and finishing his masterwork manga, while beginning prep for the biggest Ghibli to date, a landmark title again tackling the Miyazaki narrative. From Horace to Princess Mononoke, you can see the string of influences that live in the same space. The only major difference is the scale and violence. You could argue something is lost in the translation. Miyazaki hammers down on his themes and world building. It's the characters. The main character does lose a little bit of his humanity. Ashitaka never has those sad relatable moments like in Horace. Or in the case of Princess Mononoke, you don't have those fun times with the protagonist like Hilda did, in a way that makes her trials and sacrifice even more potent in the end. Neither does their relationship have that kind of development seen in Castle in the Sky. But despite all of that, I see Mononoke as a mastery of the Miyazaki concept, the one that did it as intended. It was set out to be his final film. It was a blazing path that would burn anyone down in the process. There was also much gained in that film. The nuance of its character's morality, or how it tackles its themes, from environmentalism to next to its Japanese culture, looking at the contrast between the greed of humanity and finding a way to live in harmony with nature, wrapping that message ultimately in an optimistic package, next to explosive set pieces. This was the film 30 years in the making, taking his career in a turning point where he thought he'd retire until he was spirited away. The birth of Disney's distribution was a smash hit. The West began paying attention. Disney's deal involved worldwide distribution, theatrical releases, and 10% funding on each film, all coming to a climax with Miyazaki's Spirited Away, the highest grossing film released out of Japan, yes, even now. Some call it his best. It even won the Oscar for the Best Animated Picture, and I get why. It's Miyazaki's most accessible project. With this Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland quality, it parallels that Disney style. It wraps its ending with all the warm and fuzzy feelings that it can just jam in. And it's a departure for Miyazaki's narrative, with influences coming from his own personal life and experiences, while trying to appeal to the sensibilities of 10-year-old girls, a market that he saw as untapped. Hayao would again think about retiring while he was creating some films for the Ghibli Museum. The company's next project would have a young Mamoru Hosoda set to direct, but after the rejection of all his concepts, he left, having Miyazaki pick it up to avoid the company shelving it as a whole. While the family element, as well as its use of audiovisual splendor, are wonderful, the film bites itself more than it can chew. As both an adaptation and a follow-up to Miyazaki's most successful film, some criticized it for echoing Spirited Away, in a manner trying to do it again. But however you look at it, how had its work cut out for it? It has third child syndrome. Sophie's aging is like a reflection on Miyazaki's feeling as he comes out of retirement for the second time to fare against the odds, feeling tired yet trying to gain the energy to still do it. It takes this loose adaptation of the source material, yet throws everything it can to the wayside to achieve the happiest ending for its cast. The war and action side of Howl implodes. As the producer Suzuki joked, perhaps Miyazaki has gotten too old to make demanding action films. It's lucky then other elements hold so strong, creating something beautiful, warts and all. 4 years later, Ponyo is like a new start, lavished in layers of animation, a complete showcase for the talent behind the studio. Going back to basics, they reject the CGI for a traditional setup, from its silent opening to its comfy and soft, warm aesthetic, which its handcrafted backgrounds match perfectly. It's an expedition through underwater imaginative worlds. Some say Little Mermaid inspired Ponyo, and you can see that in bits and pieces, but I'd say it's more an unofficial remake of the film which started it all for Miyazaki, The Legend of the White Serpent. People misunderstood it. They didn't get the appeal. Even Suzuki's reflection was lukewarm. A lot of them were missing the forest for the trees. It was not supposed to be another Mononoke or Spirited Away, but rather a portrait of childhood naivete. Passion bleeds into the screen. You can tell this is something Miyazaki had a lot of attachment to. In an interview with the producer, Suzuki states Miyazaki wanted to start an orphanage on a hill upon his retirement. This is the concept that inspired the movie's location, and as Miyazaki states, this is my life's wish. It's just a great time overall, and could have been a fitting finale. However, once again Miyazaki arises from retirement to create The Wind Rises, a biopic with more adult themes than what we've seen at Ghibli for a long time. A movie where planes are again the focus, which is no surprise. Ghibli was named after an Italian carrier aircraft. Hayao reflects on his life through the life of another man. There are two narratives stitched together here. The novel The Wind Has Risen, and the fictional retelling of Jiro Hirikoshi's life. Then of course there's Miyazaki's own past. His father also manufactured planes during World War II, while his mother suffered with TB in a similar fashion to the heroine of this film. I would say it's his most grounded movie to date. It could have even been live action, but the way the animation is used throughout would have been impossible to capture in the same way. It has many musings on war, artistry, and dealing with devastation. The Wind Rises could be Miyazaki's last film that he can complete. It does feel more like an old man's film. While different from the others, it still has a foot in what you'd expect from him. Which leads me into the problems that come with Miyazaki's direction. Because he draws his scripts first and doesn't plan much beforehand, saying that the films pretty much write themselves, this can mean a lot of problems. So for example, characters and plot can get muddled or pushed to the sidelines. His character designs are all cut from the same cloth, and you can tell where his interests lie when telling a narrative. The themes are very, let's say, universal. He can be a blunt authoritarian as an animation director, uncompromising to the detriment of his staff. Each frame must be as Miyazaki envisions, putting a lot of pressure on that staff, causing hospitalizations or worse. In his later years, this also became to hinder productions, as he cannot keep up with the amount of storyboards he has to draw while checking everyone else's frames. He may be picky and jaded, but under all that, Miyazaki is an idealist, always wanting to push people to do their best and escape into his creative worlds, trying to spread positivity through that, although this can lead to some of those happy endings feeling a bit forced. Even this last film has some similar issues I'll get into another time. Overall, I think as a director, he has a solid track record. I've used auteur theory throughout, but I don't believe Miyazaki sees himself that way, more just as a director. He's always said his philosophy at Ghibli was just to make good movies for children. Not that that's an easy profession, but one that he is dedicated to, or at least that was until his last couple of films, one which hasn't come out yet. It's a move towards something adult-orientated, a reflective tone. He's a bit like the animation world's Steven Spielberg, next to Joe Hisaishi's being like his John Williams. It's hard to say that he's not a master of his craft. He's been doing it for over 55 years. I mean, you'd expect him to be. You could say the biggest problem that Miyazaki faces is his legacy. He has too much notoriety for his own good. He's the first name in Japanese animation to the contention of elitists. We're starting to see other animators like Shinkai get that same kind of attention, and they're not really enjoying it. I mean, he only burst on the scene about 15 years ago, and at that point Miyazaki hadn't even directed a film. Now Shinkai's heralded as the next Miyazaki, quote, at least for now, until the new fresh guy comes onto the set, even when they don't share much in terms of style, though I'm sure they're just talking about their notoriety. And that's the problem with being a big fish in a small pond, which is the anime industry. Sometimes your legacy is so big, companies depend on it. There's been a lot of discussion about Ghibli and if it could survive without Miyazaki. Isao has never been a box office powerhouse, and one of their possible successors is somewhat reluctant, and the others have left to create their own studio. The future of the company is uncertain, and it has been since the late 90s. Would people want to see a Ghibli continue in a similar way to Disney, pushing out safe bets and sequels without the teams that created the originals that you love so much? Or would they prefer the company just to end on a high note? The whole staff is aging, and Miyazaki has mentioned in interviews that they were having a hard time getting new blood into the company. Should Ghibli's legacy end with Miyazaki's finale? Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. This is the newer updated version. I'll link the older version down below. There is still a version on YouTube, but it has been attacked by copyright vultures, so some of the audio is not all intact. If you liked it, subscribe, hit that bell. My updates are already infrequent as it is, so, I'm not going to flood it. And if you're really enjoying it, how about you join my Patreon? That would be cool. I'll make it a lot easier to do this more in the future. So yeah, cool. I'll catch you in a bit. Hope you have a good time. I hope you drink lots of water and have a good life. Love you all.